Welcome to our last video about selecting a new computer. This video we're going to be talking about our high-end business workstations. So in our other videos we talked about understanding your minimum requirements and the questions you need to ask to understand what type of computer to select. In our second video, we covered our standard business workstation requirements for our standard office user. And in our last video, we covered tablets and notebooks and laptops. So in this video, we'll be talking about the last category, which is high-end workstations. These workstations are used in graphic-intensive applications like CAD or visual effects stuff. There might be research institutions that use these workstations for modeling and simulations and lots of calculations. So these are not your standard use case workstations. So with these type of workstations, it's really important to understand what software we're using. Software selection first. The software then dictates what hardware we need to make sure that these applications work fast and smoothly for what we're trying to achieve. So we look at the software, we look at the hardware recommendations. There's going to be minimum requirements and recommended requirements, and we always want to go recommended. If it's unclear, talk to your software vendor. They'll tell you exactly the requirements you need for the type of work that you're doing with their software. With that said, however, there are some decisions that you can make to save you budget. And those decisions are usually made by deciding what type of CPU, what type of RAM, and what type of graphics card that you choose. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail about those. So firstly, CPU and RAM. There's two broad categories of CPUs that you can choose for a workstation. If we look at one brand, Intel, one of the biggest brands, there's two types of processors. There's server grade, high-end workstation processor called the Xeon processor, or there's your standard consumer grade or gaming grade CPUs called the i7, i5, i3, etc. processor range. There's some really important differences between the two, and it's really important to understand when you would need a Xeon and when you would need a consumer grade i7 or i5, for example. So firstly, the Xeon costs a lot more than the consumer grade CPU. So you need to make sure that you really need a Xeon if you're going to purchase it. There are many benefits of having a Xeon processor. It runs cooler for longer periods of time. It uses less power relative to the amount of work that you're doing with it. It's designed to run for 24/7 periods of time. It supports more memory, and it supports a different special type of memory. So there is a special type of memory called error correcting code memory, ECC memory. This memory is really important if you have software or applications that need to be highly precise. So at this point, let's talk a little bit about memory. It's really important to understand what memory errors are and why they're important, and if it matters to you or if it doesn't matter to you. Memory errors causes crashes, they cause transactional losses, they cause little data corruption in the day-to-day use of a computer. For desktops, we don't really care about memory errors too much and we don't notice them too much. In the worst case, we might get a blue screen of death that mentions something about a memory error. However, with simulations or graphical processes that take days or weeks, or modeling that has to be precise and takes extended periods of time, memory errors could crash that process, and as a result you could lose hours or days or weeks even of work. So having memory and a CPU that supports error correction is a really good investment to protect against these type of data losses or data crashes. So not only does Xeons support high level of error correction and supports error correcting memory, it's also just a better performing chip. You get more power in a smaller box. So if you really need the grunt of a Xeon chip, it's well worth the investment. However, if any of those benefits don't really matter and an i7 processor can still meet the needs of your software application, then there's no need to go to that more expensive level. It's okay to purchase a cheaper i7, it will suit your purpose. The next biggest decision that you can make in regards to high-end workstations is the graphics card. And in a similar way that we were talking about business or professional grade CPUs with Xeons and i7s and i5s, with graphics cards there's a similar divide. So let's talk about another popular brand, the NVIDIA brand. There's a group of cards called the Quadro range. These are the professional workstation graphics cards. And then there's another range, which are the consumer grade graphics cards called GeForces. So the Quadro cards are used by architects, CAD designers, special effects firms for professional grade graphics applications. The GeForces have been designed for consumers, mainly for gaming. There are some cases where a business requirement can get by with a GeForce card. The really important point here is that Quadros are 4 to 5 times more expensive than a GeForce. So if you can get away with using a GeForce, it's highly recommended. But there's some really important points to consider about what you're trying to do with the workstation. So you'd use a Quadro for these benefits. Firstly, it supports error correction. So in a similar way that we were talking about error correction with CPU and RAM, the graphics card itself is really important to have error correction for these highly precise, long simulation, data-intensive processes that take long periods of time. If a memory error kind of creeps into the memory during a 2-day, 2-week simulation and crashes the process, you've just lost a lot of time. So if that's important to you, then going for a Quadro makes a lot of sense as it supports a lot of those error correcting functionalities. A perfect example of this is medical imaging. You wouldn't want an error in an image creeping into such a critical medical document that is potentially being used to diagnose, some sort of illness. So error correcting in that type of application is essential. Secondly, Quadros support a lot more memory. So depending on your software application and how much memory it needs, Quadros might be your only option. So it's really important to understand the types of data that you're putting through your workstation and how much memory it requires. Talk to your software vendor. A perfect example again is medical imaging. CT scans or various other medical images take a lot of memory, and therefore processing many of these images at one time requires a significant amount of graphical memory on the graphics card. Another consideration is cooling and space in the computer itself. So your GeForce gaming graphics cards requires a lot of space, a lot of airflow, has really big fans on the side of the card to bring air in and out to cool down the card. Whereas your Quadros are designed to be a lot more compact and not need as much airflow and as much space. So depending on your workstation, where it will be fitting, that may be an important consideration. And lastly, there's a major difference in the precision of those two graphics cards. So the Quadro type graphics cards are really good at double point precision calculations, whereas GeForce graphics cards are good at single point precision. For basic CAD and basic 3D modeling and gaming, that doesn't make much difference. But for simulations or calculations that require high precision, it may be an important factor to consider. As you can probably tell, we can get very technical when talking about high-end workstations and the pros and cons of different components. We haven't even started talking about storage or other peripherals, so we can't really cover everything in one video. So because of that, it's really important to get a professional involved, especially when dealing with high-end workstations. You're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars of investment, and you want to get it right. So if you have any questions, please reach out. Make sure you talk to us. Make sure you talk to your software vendors that you're using, and make sure that you're selecting the right component for the right job. It could save you thousands.